Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast, episode number 128 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia, and I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews. And this week on the show, I have 8 new releases for you folks at home. Starting off with Sleeping Player, Project Chrysalis, book number 3. We'll be reviewing that right off the bat in the review section. After that, it will be Glitch, book 2. Then after that, it'll be Death March, Euphoria Online, book number 1. Then after that, it'll be Hero Slayer, a LitRPG Saga, Hero Slayer series, book number 1. Then it's going to be Dan the Barbarian, a Gamelit Harem fantasy adventure. Then it's going to be Wizard Lords, Legend of Legends. Then it is going to be Limitless Lands, book number 1. And last but not least, The Wandering Inn, volume number 1, a truly epically sized novel. Okay, before we get into that, we're getting into some LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with the story on Geoffrey fucking Logue, author of the Slime Dungeon Chronicles. He has an updated boss fight for his side-scroller dungeons, Slime Dungeon game. He's basically a friend of the show, and he's a LitRPG author. He writes Slime Dungeon Chronicles. He's doing game design right now. He's in school, so he's doing this, and he's been posting on his YouTube page, and it's been so fun to see the progress of this game. To be honest, it's pretty neat looking. This is definitely one of the more complicated scenes that I've seen him post about. But I'm also being super supportive of like a LitRPG author in the community who's trying to do something new and fresh and funny. I think the only thing that the actual bit is missing is like in really super evil boss laughs somewhere in there. So there we go. Hopefully we won't get paid by music copyright things. So this is the actual boss fight. If you want to take a look at it, so you can zoom in a little bit. Yeah, you'll see. But yeah, it's very cool. It goes through several times, but it's a nice little boss. Go check it out. Go support the author. Look at the 2-page, fun stuff. Hopefully it'll be out soon and we can actually play it. Okay, in other LitRPG news, we have some bit of news from author Vasily Mahenko. He's the author of the Way of the Shaman series. He announced this week that he's actually finished writing the second book in the Galacticon series. This has been something that people waiting for a very long time. It's been several years since that novel was updated and translated to English, so at least the Russian version of that is finally finished. According to the author, it's really just been a hiatus for quite a long time, and it's an interesting sci-fi LitRPG story. So I think fans of the genre just appreciate that it exists. But now we know that this new book is coming out. We just have to wait until February or March of 2019 for it to be translated and finished, which is a little unfortunate. But hey, at least we know it's actually going to be coming. So there we go. In other LitRPG news, Andrew Simple, author of the Threadbare series, was interviewed on Game Reads podcast. So go check that out. It's available now on YouTube. Go remember to subscribe. On Alan Kong, author of the the Land and the Chaos series. He actually posted recently that the 3rd annual Wizards and Warriors Awards for Best LitRPG are being nominated and voted on right now by fans of the genre and the members of the LitRPG Facebook group. This year's polls to nominate are available, so go nominate and vote for your favorite authors in the series. There are 3 categories for these awards: the Noob Award for the best new LitRPG author this year, the Wizard Award, the best LitRPG series, and Warrior Award, the best LitRPG book released in the last 12 months, basically. And we have links in the show notes for all those Facebook polls if you want to go check them out. Nominate the people. Basically, you're just adding who you think should be added to the list so people can vote on it. So after the nominations taken care of, I think the group narrows it down to the top 3 or something, and then you can vote for your top person there, and they'll get the award. Okay, in update to the Michael Scott Earl story, we've talked about the last few weeks. He was previously banned Michael Scott Earl. He announced recently, though, that Amazon actually sent him a response to his request for a review, and they said that he can actually, republish his novels if he uses a publisher. So it's a very interesting quirk to that statement. So he has to use a publisher. He can't self-publish, basically. So he has to use a third party to publish his novels, which is curious. And Amazon still has yet to explain to him what policy or rule he broke in the first place. But at least, his fans are going to have a place on Amazon for his works to be available. As of now, his ebooks are slowly being put back on Amazon, and the author says he has plans to publish new content very soon. So he took a little break because, I shouldn't say break. Like, the guy writes thousands of words a day, and he puts out like 2 books a month sometimes, like 300 or 400 page books. So he just slowed down a little bit because of the Amazon thing, but he is continuing publishing. He's just going to have to be through a third party publishing company. So there you go. In other Amazon related news, this is a little sadder. Dem Mikhailov, author of The World of Eldira, or the Way the Clan series, if you're familiar with that title, he's been hit with the Amazon man hammer, or at least his ebooks have been taken down from Amazon. So though some of his audiobooks and physical books are still available there. So if we have a link in the show notes for his author page, but if you go there, you'll see the entire Way the Clan series is disappeared as far as ebooks go, which is super unfortunate. I think there were up to like 9, 10 books in that series. This was a Russian title that was translated by the author into English and published here in the United States. But it was, it had its fans. It had a nice group going, had a nice community for fans of the series. So it's sad to see this drop, and I have no way to ask the author why this happened, but somebody noticed it. They posted online, and I confirmed it by going there and saying, oh yeah, this stuff is gone, and there's kind of no explanation anywhere as to why. But again, the author is not American. He's in Russia writing and stuff. So there you go. So that's it for LitRPG news. We're going to move on to new LitRPG audiobooks. There are no ebooks right now that I haven't actually had a chance to review this way. I was actually able to catch up to everything and get it all taken care of. 8 new LitRPG reviews, of course. But there are a few new audiobooks that are out now if you're interested in those. We have Death March, Euphoria Online, book number 1. This is actually, I'm reviewing the ebook version on today's show. The author arranged things so that the audiobook actually came out at the exact same time as the ebook, which is very difficult, to be honest. So good on that. Good to him. Also out as an audiobook is Fractured Spirit, Alpha World, book number 5 by Daniel Schienhofen. It is an enjoyable story. We have a review on the ebook version. We gave it a 7 out of 10, so it was nice and entertaining. Also out as an audiobooks is Awaken Online, Side Quest Apathy. Gave the ebook version of it a 7.7 out of 10. Quite entertaining. Really enjoyed the focus on a different character and come with new introduction, new origin story for a character. So fun stuff. But the audiobook is out as well. Also as an audiobook is War God's Mantle Descent, the second book in the War God Saga. There you go, written by Jay Hunter and Aaron Crash, narrated by Armin Taylor. We give the ebook version a 7.2 out of 10. Again, we'll link in the show notes for all the actual full reviews for the ebook version of them if you're interested in that. And at some point, I'm sure our audiobook version of the LitRPG Podcast will also review these titles at some point. Also out as an audiobook is Goblin King, the LitRPG Gamelit Adventure Monster Slayer Online, book number 1. We gave the ebook version a 7.2 out of 10, and of course, link the show notes for the full review. There we go. We have a few upcoming titles on upcoming LitRPG. This is just where I read off all the stuff that I know that's coming out in the near future. Honestly, it's been harder and harder to find new things that are listed on Amazon, to be honest. So I'm glad I keep putting this collection in, because otherwise this list is honestly more comprehensive than what I find on Amazon on a regular basis, because for some reason, whenever I just do a general search for LitRPG, not everything's popping up, and I have to do like different search categories and look at specific authors' pages and look for their listings or see what people are posting online, like where their upcoming stuff is coming up. So this is probably the best choice. The best list of upcoming things that I found. But I also made it on August the 17th. The novel The Lost City, which is the second book in the Realm series by C.M. Carney, is going to be out on August the 17th. On August the 24th, Bitter book number 4 is going to be out. On September the 1st is Coast on Fire, System Apocalypse book number 5. The author recently said publicly online that that's when he plans to publish this. And on September the 3rd, The Path, Just Cause Universe, book number 14. This is actually a longer running series that's more superheroish. The author is specifically publishing this novel in that series, geared towards kind of a little RPG community, and actually I've had a chance to read a little bit of it currently, and there are RPG mechanics, so hopefully it turns out to be an interesting story. But it does definitely belong in the community, and it's interesting. So there you go, September the 3rd. On September the 24th, it'll be Game Changer Reality Benders, book number 3. On September the 26th, it'll be Free Haven Online, Lady Thunderbird into Hades, book number 2. On September the 28th, it'll be Couch Potatoes Gamebound. On October the 8th, it'll be Kingdom of the Dead and NPC's Path, book number 2. And on October the 25th, it'll be A Clan's Honor, a little bit adventure, Rogue Realms, book number 1. On November 21st, it'll be Free Haven Online, Winter Dungeon Land, book number 3. So there you go, folks. Those are all the stuff that I know is coming out in the near future. On to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we're going to begin with The Sleeping Player, Project Chrysalis, book number 3, written by John Gold. It is 362 pages, $6.95. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Wake up, Sagi. Have you heard about what happened at Castle Arius 5 years ago? Don't talk too loud. It's dangerous right now. They're still looking for that certain wanderer. If you have any information, please let us know. How difficult is it to survive the human world full of people hell-bent on destruction as a poor cat? People equal danger. LJ knows that for sure, but maintaining a distance is not that easy when the home you care about is becoming an epicenter of a demon invasion. He has to be strong and know right from wrong, no matter what the voices whisper to him in his bloody and restless dreams. 5 peaceful years have passed since the war with the undead ended. Respite is now over. A war has raised its demonic sword. New, talented, and tricky high-level wanderers are ready to confront the threat or to cause even more destruction. So there we go. Sleeping Player is the 3rd installment of LitRPG series, Project Chrysalis. There you go. The story is far from its end, no wonder. So, yep, that's some other stuff. Basically, this is the 3rd book in the Project Chrysalis series. And I'll be honest, the beginning kind of lost me. I almost put this novel down and didn't pick it up again, but I forced my way through. And I'm super glad that I did. The beginning of the novel really is hard to get through, at least it was for me. It doesn't feel like the same LitRPG story or even one in the series. It has a new main character, LJ, the boy who thinks he's a cat. And it kind of goes on his adventures. And even though the story reconnects eventually with the main character from the first 2 books, the good portion of the beginning section feels like a bit of a series because there was this huge 5-year time jump between books 2 and 3. It's set in a new place. There are new characters. The pacing of the story slows down a little bit in the first half of the story. And for me, this early part of the story, it really just wasn't that interesting. It kind of tries to go into this magical academy story-ish a little bit, and it's like, oh, this doesn't feel like the same books 1 and 2 for the first beginning portion of the story. I can genuinely consider putting it out at a few points, but again, I got to the halfway mark on the story and boom, it just kind of shifted. The story explodes back into all the things I really liked about books 1 and 2. Wonderful fights, old interesting characters return, and the quest for revenge actually makes some progress. Like that had been like kind of the thing for books 1 and 2, and you're actually seeing some of that progress in book 3, so that's good. The pace picks up and significantly, and it's a really epic fight ending. And I was really entertained by that ending. So by the end, I was cheering for our hero, and the novel had kind of won me over again. Overall, though, even though I had a good time with the story, the beginning again is kind of rough. But again, it eventually won me over. I don't know if everyone's going to have the patience to kind of go through the beginning portion. Like, there's definitely like a plot point connection between LJ and like the rest of the series. It's a little bit harder to get through again because it's not super action oriented. It's a little more character development, but it also feels very new. It doesn't feel like it actually fits in the series because again, new characters, different settings with different motivations. So I'm like, oh, okay. But eventually, let's get back to the story that you probably liked if you've gone through books 1 and 2. So for me, it gets a score 7.1 out of 10. That's The Sleeping Player, Project Chrysalis, book number 3. It's still enjoyable, but it's definitely on the lower end of that scale with a 7.1 out of 10. So there you go. Okay. Next review. Glitch, book number 2 in the Glitch series number 2. That's what it says. It is written by Victor Deckard. It is 116 pages, $1.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Max, a rather plain guy, finds himself inside a apocalyptic survival role-playing video game. He has no idea how he ended up in the virtual reality or how to quit. He has no choice but to play the game. Shortly afterward, he learns that the game is quite harsh and cruel. Max finds out that in order to survive, he has to scavenge, gather various resources, craft warm clothes and armor, and upgrade weapons and vehicles, and so on. Moreover, the entire game world is full of full-on PvP zone, so Max has not only to fight brutal mutants, but he also has to protect himself against the gamers who have teamed up in order to ratchet up their chances of survival, as well as against high-level players who take great pleasure in murdering newbies. And all the while, Max has been trying to find out what has befallen him, how he has gotten into the video game, and whether or not there is any chance of exiting the game. Bit by bit, he gleans more and more information about the game. He finds out about the game is full of bugs. Later on, he also learns that he himself is some kind of glitch. Unlike the other players, he feels pain in the game and can interact with some game objects, while all the players cannot. Okay, so that's a very long introduction. My review is much shorter. Book 1 in the series, actually, it had some intriguing plot points. It didn't quite work for me, but I figured I'd give the second book a chance. It's essentially a short story series, or maybe it's called novella. I can't remember the technical aspects of it, but the series in general introduces like mostly a Fallout or a post-apocalyptic setting. There's crafting, there's player versus player stuff, there's monster zones, there's quests. And I thought it was, okay, this is cool. It's interesting. I'll give the second book a shot. Maybe it improves. And it didn't. It really didn't. Unfortunately, book number 2 doesn't actually develop most of the things I found interesting in book 1. Instead, book number 2 almost focuses entirely on player versus player combat, with a little bit of monster wave survival stuff towards the end. And again, there's no real progression towards any kind of story or even a goal. Like, the main character just kind of exists and he wanders around and he does stuff, but there's no... As the reader, as an author, I can kind of make, oh, maybe this is where he's going in the future at some point. But as the reader, it's not really made clear to me what the point of the series is. Whether the main character is trying to get home or not, whether he's actually making progress towards a specific goal of like doing something. I don't know. That's kind of the point of the reviews. Like, I was super confused as far as what the plot was, and you don't really have to have like a super detailed plot, but like some goals, like the main character wants to escape, he wants to, get the bad guy who got him here, but there's none of that happening really. There's some tentative exploration of questions like, oh, I'm going to try to tell the players that I'm meeting who aren't trying to murder me, that I'm stuck in the game, but nobody believes me, and that's kind of the extent of where that goes. So overall, it just kind of felt flat for me. So it gets a score of 5 out of 10. So there you go. Again, it is LitRPG. No questions about that. I always enjoy the game mechanics here. They're interesting. There is definitely progression, but again, it's muted a little bit because anytime the characters die, they lose levels. So a lot of the story is regaining those levels and those powers that the main characters already achieved. So it feels like you're kind of running back over told story a little bit in that respect. But again, score of 5 out of 10 for Glitch book number 2, the Glitch series, with a score of 5 out of 10. There you go. Okay, on to our third review. It is going to be Death March Euphoria Online book number 1, written by Phil Tucker. It is 300 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. I sacrificed everything for my family. It wasn't enough. I lost my mother, and now I'm about to lose my brother. I've got only one thing left to gamble, my life, which is why I'm willing to play Euphoria Online in Death March mode. If I survive 6 months in game against a lethal way of wyverns, ogres, necromancers, and more, I'll earn my brother a pardon. If I lose, well, I'm done with losing. So there you go. Full disclosure, I received an advanced copy of the novel for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. The premise of the story is essentially that the main character, Chris, trusts his super evil ex-girlfriend and takes a weekend pass to the latest and greatest full immersion virtual reality MMO. He plans to put the game on Death March mode, which, if he survives for 6 months in game, will grant him just about any wish he wants, including a pardon for his brother, who might soon be on death row for salvaging in underwater buildings. The only snag, if he dies in the game, he dies in real life. So there you go. That's essentially the premise. Now, the author has written over 15 other novels, many of which are traditional epic fantasy. And I mention that because the novel kind of leans in that direction a little bit. A lot of the stories are sometimes. The author has also had a very successful Kickstarter campaign for this particular novel. He raised over $13,000 to write this LitRPG story specifically, to create a hardcover edition with extra artwork, and to make an audiobook, which is why the author actually has an audiobook out right now for this particular story as well. You basically know that the author already has fans for us, because they were willing to shell up $13,000, and so the author's writing has never been in question for me at all. This is his first LitRPG story, and again, sometimes because of that background as a fantasy writer, I kind of feel a lot of the story descriptions lean a little more towards the fantasy setting, which may in part be for its existing reader base. Like it's really hard to have an existing base in one genre to switch to something else and expect everyone to follow you over. The novel here, I think, does a really good balancing act of maintaining those expectations for fantasy descriptions, but also adding some new things for LitRPG readers. And the author does have an actual LitRPG game mechanic system in the story. So there you go. So it does a balancing act. But for me, it leaned a little more towards fantasy. So there you go. The short review of this is that despite the issues I have with the RPG game mechanics and the premise, which I have a number of issues, I like the story. I did. The characters are well developed. There's good tension. There's good fantasy, action, adventure storytelling, and it is entertaining. So there you go. So that's what it is. Basically gets a score of 7.2 out of 10, I believe it was. Yeah, 7.2 to 10. So if you don't want any, the rest of the reviews a little bit minor spoilers, but I say them because these are issues that I think bothered me, and would have made a thorough review without describing them. So there you go. So if you want to skip ahead, do so now. No? Okay. If you continue on, okay, so the game mechanics in the story are relatively light. They're grouped together in summaries after fights mostly, and in sections where like players are talking to each other. And sometimes, honestly, the game mechanics feel less important than the story. And that's a decision every author has to make when they write in this genre. How important are the game mechanics to the direction of the story? Some authors make the game mechanics so important that no matter what they want to do with the story, if the game mechanics say they can't do that, they follow that. So if they, and sometimes they have to modify the game mechanics or just adjust things in the game setting so that it makes their main characters not die. That's happened before, but the game mechanics still definitely rule in that case. And other authors choose the other direction, which is that the story leads. And so you'll find the story not really following the game mechanics, or like, conveniently being light on the game mechanic explanation in certain areas so that the story can continue on unabated. And so the author writes the story and basically molds the game mechanics around that story, or just ignores them entirely sometimes so that the plot can continue on in the way that the author wants. And neither one is either good or bad. It just is. And in this case, it kind of leans more towards the story leading a little bit. The game mechanics in the novel include traditional character sheets, although you only see that a couple times. Stats, descriptions, and abilities, spells. Players earn experience points and can spend it to purchase new abilities and spells. And at the same time, the amount of XP the characters earn gets them new levels and predetermined increases in their stats. And again, you can kind of tell when you're reading the story that the author they foregoed. I don't think that's the right word. They basically skipped anything that was really super heavy math tracking with formulas. So there's nothing like damage notifications or tracking of specific like XP points for like specific levels or information like that. So there are no health bars, no stamina bars, no damage notifications, and there's really no UI interface described in the game. Combat is always described in like this fantasy terms, with again XP handed out after every encounter when it's finished. And sometimes the XP is a little inconsistent. Like when you do the math on it, you figured, I'm very math oriented. So when I looked, I'm like, that doesn't seem like it should, because this other monster was about the same level, and he did the same things, and that kind of stuff. So it's a minor thing. Additionally, the main character seems to often win or gain power through some lucky outside influence or wand-wavy circumstance that prioritizes again story over game roles. Like the main character will get saved often by someone you've never seen before. Like literally someone you've never seen before. He's about to die. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna save you. Person I don't know. And again, that's also just story going over game mechanics. And again, it's a small thing for me, but it does always bug me when like the main character doesn't become the hero, doesn't really progress and empower his own journey through life, I guess. So, and again, or like the main character finding just that magic doohickey that he just happens to need in that next fight. So small, convenient things like that. Overall, again, the gaming stuff isn't bad. It's used very consistently in the story, which is always important. So whatever the author has set up is used consistently. It's throughout the entire novel, so no complaints there. So it's just not a particularly deep system. Story-wise, the novel honestly is one of the most confusing premises I've ever come across, and this is probably the part I have the most issues with, because not only does it not make sense on a story level for me, it also doesn't make sense on a math level, which really bugs me. I don't know why, but it does. When math doesn't make sense, it really bothers me. And so here are some issues I had with the premise. The game mechanics uses time dilation to let players stay in the game longer. Unfortunately, the time dilation is not consistently described. There were 3 sets of numbers that are given in the story, as far as like ratios for time compression: 18-1, 45-1, and 80-1. Now, the last one is a little more extrapolated. It's described as being 18 minutes real world time equaling 1 day in game, which when you do the math on it becomes out to 80-1. Now, even at the most extreme one, which is an 80-1 ratio, which means like, 80 minutes in game equals 1 minute in real life, or 80 days in game equals 1 day in real life, or vice versa. The main character has a weekend pass, which means he has essentially 2 days to accomplish his goals. Yet at an 80-1 ratio, that means he's going to be in game for 160 days, which means that his goal of surviving for 6 months is literally impossible, because 160 days on average about 30 days per month is 5.3 months. Again, making it literally impossible for him to survive in the game for the required 6 months to get his big reward. So there's literally a broken premise right off the bat as far as the math goes. The author may change the requirements, or he may allow him to add more time later in the series, but as far as this one goes, it's something that stuck out to me as like, oh, that math doesn't work, kind of thing, you know what I mean? Now, the motivations for pushing the main character to go in the game and risk his life, for me, stretches believability a bit. His brother is charged with a capital crime for salvaging. And even though there are like other circumstances revolved around it, the case hasn't even gone to trial. So why is the main character risking his life, literally, to get a pardon for his brother who hasn't been convicted of a crime yet? That just felt a little off. Additionally, why would you ever trust your evil ex-girlfriend? In any way, shape, or form. It was not super expensive to get this weekend pass. It was like a $3,000 investment. So it just didn't seem like it was worth it to me. Again, small little things. It is an interesting character point in the story, and it gives you a lot of opportunity for backstory in the character. It's just like, okay. It's one of the things you kind of, for me, it's like, oh, okay, I'll just ignore this because it's an entertaining story point. Additionally, why is there a voluntary death game in a normal MMORPG? Like, it's literally, it's not like it's a separate game server where everybody's doing a death risk game. It's the main character is in game with all the other normal players who do player versus player and BKing, and he has to survive in that world for 6 months without dying once. And if he does die once, he dies in real life. Like, literally it's described as like the machine that's on his head will fry his brain. And it just didn't really make sense to me. Like, I understand that there's a lot of influences from other novels and other animes like Sword Art Online where you feel like, oh, death in the game, death in real life is like a thing for a little bit, you're right? And it's supposed to raise the stakes in the story. But for me, all it really did was tell me that the main character was never going to die, and that, or even really fail in the story, because that consequence would be character death. And I know that's like the default setting for most novels, and nobody ever thinks about it because the real life is like that. But in LitRPG, that's not the default setting. Like, it really isn't. Like, for gaming culture, dying in video games is part of the learning experience, and it's kind of fun. Like, you die, you respawn, you reload, or whatever, and you learn until you get good enough not to die. But that dying process is very much a part of gaming culture. Like, I don't know any games in the last like 30 years of my experience where I haven't, like, dying hasn't been a part of like the learning and enjoyment experience, even if it is super frustrating sometimes. Even if it's like a roguelike or like a permadeath game, you still get to reload and try again, even with another character. So it's like I said, that mechanic never really works for me, because that always indicator in the story like, oh, if he dies in the game down the road, that means he's never gonna die or fail in the game or in the story. So like it's a little spoilery. It's also a big stretch in my opinion to believe that the main character, who's level 1, never comes close to dying in the entire story, even though he's facing an entire zone of monsters who are 20 to 30 times his level. So it's, again, and that kind of conflicts with, again, the concept of being a noob. So like I said, there were just slight issues, but again, nothing was really bad enough that I put down the story or didn't enjoy myself. There's just things that bugged me and lowered my enjoyment level enough that it doesn't get like it doesn't get like 8 out of 10 or even a high 7. It gets on the lower in the enjoyment scale, but it's still a 7 out of 10. Story wise, once the main character actually gets into the game, it's really actually a nice slice of life action adventure story. Again, I don't want you to think because I have these issues that I didn't enjoy the story. Once the main character is in game, once he's actually just doing stuff, it's a nice slice of life action adventure experience. You just have to ignore why he's there, because honestly, if your goal is to survive for 6 months without dying, risking your life to level all the time is kind of a contradiction. Like, I would have expected him to like just go in a hole, hide out there for 6 months as a guaranteed way to survive, and get the thing that's going to save his brother's life. But instead, he goes on adventures and risks his life every time he fights a monster who's 30 times his level. But, that's a side point. Combat is just well described. And again, these are good fight scenes. Like, I think it's one of the better points in the novel is that the fight scenes are very visceral. They're often described in like fantasy terms and not like game terms. Like the powers and spells that are used, they feel like, they're more described as fantasy things instead of like game mechanic stuff. But again, it's just that might just be the way that the author writes, having written again 15 odd novels that are all more fantasy-ish. There's good characters, there's good story development, and again, by the end of the story, you can see some of the story threads of the authors being laying down for the longer series. So good storytelling all around. Overall, again, even though I had issues with the premise and the RPG stuff, it's just still a good, entertaining story. And I think people who don't have the same issues as me are really going to like this a lot more. Even though I didn't like it. I could give the score 7.2 out of 10. Death March Euphoria Online book number 1 gets a score of 7.2 out of 10 for me. So there you go, enjoyable. Okay. On to our next review, which is going to be Hero Slayer, a LitRPG Saga. Hero Slayer series book number 1, written by Andrew Waters. It is 60 pages. It is $2.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. So there you go. Here's the author's description. This is the legend of the Hero Slayer, who has sold his soul for the magic most vile, who would attack heroes at their weakest and destroy everything they hold dear. Rumors had it that none of those who attacked him ever lived to tell the tale. It was said that he had the power to take down thousands without lifting a finger. Others speculated that he had dwelt in a secret place filled with long-lost magic and magical creatures protecting his secret lair. Stories said that if you rang a bell at the 7th hour on the 7th day, your body would never again be found, for that was the hour of the Hero Slayer walked through the dark taking souls to feed his power. Nearest to say he was a villain, the boogeyman, the big bad, the dragon who defeated the knight and killed the princess. This is a story in which the dark side won. Forced to leave planet Earth, Bobby enters a new world and he journeys from wannabe villain to Hero Slayer. Now, the only thing about that that's actually true is probably the last sentence. The last sentence is probably the only thing that's really accurately describes this particular story, which is annoying. At 60 pages, for $2.99, that's almost a page cost of like 5 cents per page. It's about 5 times more than I normally spend. The novel is honestly too expensive for that page count. Again, it's not even on Kindle Unlimited, which makes it harder for people to even give it a shot. Plus, the last 25% of this novel is a sample of something else. I think it's in the same series, but still, it's not actually this story. So even the 60 page count is inaccurate. So there you go. There are also technical writing issues with the story. There's very awkward phrasing. There's mixed tenses throughout the novel, which means like you're writing in past and present tense in the same sentence, which can lead people unconsciously feel like, oh, this is confusing or there's something kind of off about the way it's phrased, even if people can't like pinpoint it. That's one of those things. And the RPG mechanics, there are RPG mechanics, I should say, but they don't really make a ton of sense. The story is just honestly confusing. The Earth is hit by the apocalypse, but aliens save it, and the main character and his grandma get sent into a pod to another world or something. And for some reason on this new world, there are RPG mechanics. And it's not really explained why. There really isn't. And then there's this odd player versus player system where the main character gets challenged for some reason, but there's no explanation of like what the point of it is. So there are some attempts at world building. I'm not saying there's not. And character development. It's just that it's such a mixed bag of stuff. Like this novel kind of goes everywhere. It really does. And it just, nothing really feels fleshed out. Like never the thing ever feels focused where I understood or cared about anybody. So for me, it just kind of got a score of a meh. Because it didn't make sense. Because score of 5 out of 10. It is LitRPG. The main character does level and stuff, so it technically is. But again, it's not particularly. There's no real system here to talk about, and it's certainly nothing that's to write home about. So it gets a kind of it's a mess score. It gets a score of 5 out of 10. That's Hero Slayer, LitRPG Saga, Hero Slayer series book number with a score of 5 out of 10. There you go. On to Dan the Barbarian. A Gamelit Harem fantasy adventure Gold Girls in Glory book number 1, written by Hondo Jinx. It is 336 pages. It is 99 cents. That's supposed to be a temporary price point. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. When college sophomore Dan Marshall's life morphs into a hybrid of Penn State and a homebrew tabletop RPG adventure, he grabs his talking two-handed sword, hits campus seeking gold, girls, and glory. But even with 2 beautiful badass women at his side, how can a low-level barbarian survive when he's pitted against a fraternity of gnolls, a dungeon full of nightmares, and an apocalyptic death cult bent on destroying the whole world? Warning, Dan the Barbarian is an over-the-top adventure intended for readers 18 and over, includes explicit sex, graphic violence, and a harem of gorgeous ass-kicking girls, and a foul-mouthed two-handed sword. Read at your own risk. Okay, so this is actually true. The novel has actually a lot of graphic sex scenes. It also has cursing and violence, but honestly, the sex scenes are probably the thing that are going to be the most issue for people. Even though it says it's Gamelit, the novel actually is also LitRPG. There are RPG mechanics. It's more tabletop oriented, but there's character sheets, stats, leveling. Nothing super amazing, but it's also familiar stuff. And the story portion of the story is essentially wish fulfillment harem. The main character, Dan, wishes for his life to be like a fantasy tabletop game he plays with his friends. He wants his life to be full of action, adventure, and busty women that want him. Only when he does get his wish and becomes a level 1 barbarian, he finds the normal world and all the people he knew there are merged with the rules of this fantasy tabletop game. The hot girl down the hall, for example, is now even hotter, and she's a druid, and of course she wants to have sex with him. The main character goes on adventures, becoming the adventure-seeking person he always wanted to be, and having lots of sex along the way. This is not a serious. I mean, it's not like super like dark or serious or gritty or like. It's an entertaining story. It's lighthearted. It's kind of a funny read. Like I like the humor in here specifically. It's very geek oriented, jokey like that. So there's really good stuff here, but it does also have a lot of sex. The sex scenes aren't great. They're there. They're on the slightly graphic side, I guess, but the writing for them is not awesome. I'm like, it was okay, I guess. I ended up just skipping all of them except for the first one. But even ignoring that, it's still an entertaining story. It's just like not my favorite, but again, that's not meant to be. It's very lighthearted. It's not meant to be taken too seriously. It's just kind of this fun action adventure stuff with, hot chicks who want to have sex with the main character. So if you're into that, I think this will really work for you. It's not really my thing. I'm not really into like the graphic sex scenes personally, but I can ignore them, and the rest of the story was entertaining. So gets a score of 7.1 out of 10 for me. That's Dan the Barbarian, a Gamelit Harem fantasy adventure, Gold Girls, and Glory book number 1. That's such a long title. With the score of 7.1 out of 10. So entertaining, but definitely on the lower end of that spectrum. Okay, on to our next review, which is Wizard Lords, Legends of Legends, a LitRPG fantasy Wizard Lords book number 1, written by Jamie Winter. It is 45 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'm going to skip the description because basically the review is basically this is overpriced for 45 pages, $2.99. There are a lot of noticeable technical writing issues, and most importantly, if it says it's LitRPG, it's not. It really isn't. I don't know if the author just doesn't understand what LitRPG requires, like RPG mechanics, but the novel describes itself as a cross between Legends of Zelda meets The Matrix. And that really should have been my first clue, like when I was looking at it, because I've had this on the upcoming LitRPG stuff for like months, and now there is more things on pre-order on Amazon, and I kind of suspected that it wasn't actually going to be it, but you know, you can never tell, so I try not to judge until I actually read a story, and it really isn't. There is kind of a save the princess aspect to the story, but there's no RPG mechanics. There's like a mention of a few levels towards the end of the story, like the words levels are used, but nobody's actually shown doing any of that. It's more just like this thing where the main character saves the girl that he has a crush on in the world. She's taken to this other world, and he has to go save her and go there. So that's kind of all it is. But it's not a LitRPG. So it gets a score of 4 out of 10 for me. Not only just because it wasn't LitRPG like I said it was, because it's honestly kind of a confusing mixed story. Like the writing itself is a little confusing. That's best I'll describe, I guess. So 4 out of 10. Wizard Lords Legends of Legends, a LitRPG. You know, that's what it is. There you go. On to our next review. Limitless Lands, book number 1, written by Dean Hennigar. Okay, it is 227 pages, 99 cents. Really nice price point. Available on Kindle Unlimited as well. And here's the author's description. Colonel James Raytag is about to die. The 93-year-old combat veteran is living his last days in a nursing home. His only hope for survival is an experimental MedPod life support system controlled by an artificial intelligence. Co-developed by the world's largest gaming company, Trinos, the artificial intelligence will also control the soon-to-be-released game Limitless Lands. Without its creator's knowledge, the artificial intelligence decides the best course of treatment is to import its patient's consciousness directly into the game. Colonel Raytag must dust off his military training and lead his virtual troops in a fight to repair his broken body and mind while exploring the Limitless Lands. So there we go. It is, again, 227 pages. Again, good price point, 99 cents. It really is. Also available on Kindle Limited. The story has a very unique setting, and the author took a little bit of time in the novel to do some very succinct explanation of what the tech is for full immersion, as well as some legitimately good world building for the modern world that would combine virtual reality, an aging military population, kind of this drone warrior world where like real soldiers don't exist anymore in like the future. And instead, all fighting is done through drones. And so there's no real like military culture, just people who are technicians and repairmen basically in the military. So like this aging military population who's getting to be their 80s and 90s, who are essentially like the last warriors of the world. And it combines that with like the concept of like medical pods that allow these people to get a new lease on life potentially. So I really like the world development of like the world culture and the story. It was very nicely done. The main character, James Raytag, is again a military vet at the end of his life. His son, an employee at the top VR gaming company, creates a medical pod that will not only provide life support, but medical care. And the main character is the first test subject. And part of his treatment, according to the AI's plan, is not to repair his body and his mind on a physical level with nanites, but to also help him recover his lost memories through playing this game, Limitless Lands. And the main character is in the game by the 11% mark. I think that it takes a little long to get there personally, and there were some points in there that I think were necessary. But again, it's a story, and the main character is in the game by the 11%, and he stays there with each of like a few like times coming out for medical checkups. He's there the rest of the novel. Once the game world, the main character gets a unique class based on his military experience, the Commander class, which lets him order the troops assigned to him during combat, provides some true fight buffs, and basically puts him in the role of not just a soldier, but also a commanding officer, where so he has platoons of troops under him. He has a sergeant who's his second in command, and they go on combats and they fights. The downside of the class is that he can only experience from his soldiers victories or from quests. Even if he fights individually in combat, he doesn't get experience points for it. So it's definitely a nice, detriment to the advantage side of this particular unique class. The rest of the game mechanics story are very standard. Character sheets, stats, quest notifications, experience notifications, experience towards like levels and stuff. The main character essentially is assigned powers and abilities as he's working, as he does stuff. He does get a few like path choices, but again, it's not particularly a deep game mechanic system. There are also some very minor town building and player versus player aspects to the story, but again, they're not like a big portion of this novel in the series. I think there will be in future novels potentially, but again, this one they're minor setups. The story itself isn't complicated and kind of amounts to just travel, world building, setting up for future storylines, and a good bit of fighting. This is definitely an action oriented fighting story. Like that's the most of what there is in this novel. Unfortunately, the combat in the story was a bit meh for me. There are some visceral action descriptions, but a lot of the combat is described the way it would in like military fiction, in that it's calling out formation names, command structure stuff, military lingo, the chain of command issues, giving and taking orders, and that's a good portion of the story, even outside of combat. Like that's where it focuses. It focuses on like the military aspect of this faction in this fantasy game world. Like a better way to describe the comic was basically the main character calls out like, oh, right flank come in this way, left flank come in here, middle advance, and then there's a description like how they're working to, like the groups are working together to do this formation and how the enemy's reacting, and to some people that's going to be really exciting and adventurous. For me, I thought it was a little dry. And so it didn't quite work for me. Like there are some points in the story where it's a much smaller focus group where it's just the main character, or it's just like him and a few other people doing fighting, and that was a little more exciting. But a lot of the story is really like military culture, military formation kind of focused. And for me, like I said, it just wasn't bad necessarily. Just like, oh, it's dry, and I found myself like wanting to skip through those scenes. Unfortunately, another thing that kind of just bothered me is that it's supposed to be a fantasy world, and the main character's faction essentially is modeled after the Roman Legion and Rome. If you look at the cover, it's very on point. But the actual descriptions of the military organization and how the things are described in the story are very much modern military, including like organizational structures, formations, the way that the main character just yells out commands, and from his experience in the U.S. military. I believe he was a Marine, and he just, and all of his troops, even though they're fantasy creatures or fantasy oriented AI programmed NPCs, they understand exactly what he means, and they do exactly what he says, and it works out as you would expect a modern military to work. And so it just felt a little off to me in the setting. Another thing kind of bothered me is that the main character gets this really cool class of commander and multiple platoons of soldiers to command on his very first day, without ever having played this particular game and at level 1. And for me, it just felt like the main character was given this overpowered class and a bunch of power in the form of like literally like hundreds of troops, that he never did anything to earn. But I think it would have been, this is again personal opinion, a more interesting story if he had worked his way up through the ranks, like started as a soldier and then eventually got the advanced class when he started like doing smaller groups and leading smaller platoons, or just a couple other like soldiers, and then got bigger and bigger. It would have felt like he had earned that particular advanced class a little better if he'd gone that way. Unfortunately, it's not. He really is just like given this class and said, oh, here's a bunch of soldiers for you to command and go to it. And it just feels, again, kind of unearned as far as like a reward or a power structure. And he just does so well in the story that it felt a little boring, because again, it felt like he was always going to succeed because he had experience or a role being commander, which is not again necessarily a bad thing. It's just from a game mechanic standpoint, from RPG games, like there's this power progression for a reason, like, and that's the experience that gamers essentially have. It's like you starting out in the story would be equivalent of like, oh, you're starting out with an advanced class with your entire kingdom already built. And where's the excitement in that? Like part of the excitement for this kind of games and these stories is, oh, how you're earning these rewards through hard work or through intelligence. And there's a little bit of progression. I'm not saying there's not none at all, but for the most part, it felt unearned, at least to me. Outside of combat, again, the kind of same thing kind of goes for the troops as well. The troops the main character's given, outside of combat, they're described as, oh, green recruits just at a boot camp. But in combat, they work too perfectly. Like they don't make mistakes. They work like a well-oiled machine, completing complex formations and maneuvers that the reader was never shown that they trained to learn. The reader's told at some points, oh, that the soldiers practiced this until they got it right. But we're never shown it. So even like the skills and abilities that the troops get, they again don't feel earned, because again, the reader never saw it happen. It's just like, oh, literally a sentence saying, oh, they practiced a bunch of stuff. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Overall, the story just didn't land for me. Part of that is just the issues that I talked about. Another part is just that I'm not really into military fiction. It's just not my thing. If you like military fiction, though, you might like this story more than I did, which is totally cool. Different stories for different people. But it just didn't land for me. It gets a score 6 out of 10 for me for the Limitless Lands, book number 1. But again, if you like military fiction, if you like all that stuff I talked about, and that's your thing, you'll like this. Go read it. Have a good time. Okay, on to our last review, which is going to be The Wandering Inn, volume number 1, written by Pirate Abba. It is 1,158 pages. It is $3.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. So there you go. And again, the reason it's not available on Kindle Unlimited is in the novel description, the author says this is a novel. It's free as a web serial. You can go to the author website at thewanderinginn.com and read it for free, basically. So the author is actually giving it to you for free if you don't want to pay. I do suggest that if you like the story, go support the author. I mean, go donate to his Patreon page or go buy this, because it's genuinely a good book. You can tell the author's put a ton of time and effort into crafting this cool world. Here's the author's description. No killing goblins. So reads the sign outside of the Wandering Inn, a small building run by a young woman named Erin Solstice. She serves pasta with sausage, blue fruit juice, and dead acid flies on her quest, and she comes from another world, ours. It's a bad day when Erin finds herself transported to a fantastical world and nearly gets eaten by a dragon. She doesn't belong in a place where monsters' attacks are a fact of life, and where humans are one species among many, but she must adapt to her new life or die. In a dangerous world where magic is real and people can level up and gain classes, Erin Solstice must battle somewhat evil goblins, deadly rock crabs, and hungry necromancers. She is no warrior, no mage. Erin Solstice runs an inn. She is an innkeeper, and that's her class. So there you go. So there's no real way to kind of summarize. This is like a huge novel, and there are like 4 more volumes that are equally as big if you go look on it. It's an ongoing story. I think the author is starting volume 5 in this series, so it's there available to read free. But again, it's a serial story, and you can tell that this is kind of just a smush collection of those things. Like at some point, I was like, oh, this seems like a good place to start a volume or to stop the volume, and that's what it kind of feels like. There's no overarching like big plot or anything like that. You can tell, and there you go. And it continues to grow weekly, so even if you read it now, the story is going to continue on. It's just the author's like in his notes, I had the free online version. I had it edited and professionally like looked at, and that's what he's publishing. So you do get added value for this particular story if you do purchase it. Okay, essentially this is a slice of life LitRPG story, and this novel, this volume in the series is a little bit light on the RPG stuff. It is LitRPG. There are character levels, there's magic, there are skills that exist in the world, and the main character does gain levels and skills. It's just, that's not the emphasis. Like there are some LitRPG stories where the game mechanics are the emphasis, like gaining levels and doing the RPG grind, and doing the XP grind and finding new powers and abilities and exploring things like that. That's not what this is. The RPG stuff is really more almost a cultural aspect of the world. This is portal fiction, and that the main characters are transported from world to this world and they have to adapt. And the RPG stuff is almost another layer of cultural aspects in the world, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about the story, is that it is another layer, and there's a lot of other layers that are described in the story that I really liked as far as like cultural and world development. This, even though there are a lot of mechanics, this is still a very entertaining story. The story more than makes up for it. The story follows 2 humans, hints at more, that are transported to a fantasy world where RPG mechanics are a part of the world. One gets the innkeeper class when she stumbles into an abandoned inn and struggles to survive. The other becomes a runner, an on-foot package delivery person because she loves to run and be free. Well, now the story sounds compelling as I described them, obviously. They are. I promise you, they're super compelling stories. I will warn you that the beginning of the story is super slow. Things pick up about 5% into it, but which is I think about 40-50 pages. But it is, again, the beginning is hard to get through. But I encourage you to push through because it's such a good story. It really is. The story again follows. It explodes into like this huge thing about world building, progression, character growth. There's even some comedy in the story. But again, it really is a slice of life story. So it's easy to pick up, easy to put down because you're just following what these 2 main characters do. as they're doing things in their daily life. And yet I still found it interesting and genuinely fascinating at some points. Again, I love the thought and time now they're putting into developing unique cultures for the monster races. Like the main character, or one of the main characters, the Innkeeper, exists in an area of the world where it's mostly a monster race population. So you have people who are insect race, don't have to know their technical names, lizard people and gnolls and some other races that are living in a city. And humans are the minority. And the author really did, over the course of, again, 1,000 pages, did a really good job, like developing each one of those races as having unique cultures, having unique outlooks and unique viewpoints on things like sex and other races and their outlooks on life and what's important to them. And all that really comes through in the story. And again, because it is, again, slightly less combat oriented, the author does some like just really good things with conversations, in having these characters interact and exploring this new fantasy world through the eyes of a stranger in a strange land, which would be the main characters, the innkeeper and the runner. So like there's a lot of good exploration in those regards as well, and good character development. I guess I could talk about this for a long time. But again, in the end, the story even has like a really great action section towards the end of the story. It's really good action fest. And the author gets G.R.R. Martin on you, man. Like the author really did. Like, you like some characters, don't get too attached. So like really good stuff. Not only is the novel a huge value for the page count, it's engaging enough to keep you reading late into the night for multiple days. I honestly couldn't put it down. It's light LitRPG again, but it's a really good, it's a great read. It really does. It gives a score of 8 out of 10 for me. It's a great story. I had a good time reading it. I'm almost tempted to go online and read it, but I'm going to wait till the volumes come out on Amazon just because I don't like to read unfinished, unedited products. I don't want to judge it by the unfinished state. So I'll wait for volume 2 to come out on Amazon, but I hope it does come quickly. So for me, this is definitely the best story of the week for me with a score of 8 out of 10. That's The Wandering in volume number 1. Go check it out with a score of 8 out of 10. There you go. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We're done. That's the whole show. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Remember, you can catch us on, if you want to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, our webpage at LitRPGPodcast.com. We have a whole list of like LitRPG novels you can search through for our reviews and see what's good, what's not, and what's amazing. There are some other LitRPG Facebook groups where I have links in the show notes for you if you want to go check them out there. If you're doing the podcast, you want to support us in any way, shape, or form, you can find all the ways you do so at LitRPGPodcast.com/support. And again, folks, thanks for hanging out with me. And until we can hang out again and I can gush about this thing that I love, LitRPG, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.